Greetings and welcome back to the Real Lawyers podcast, produced by Lexbug, the world's largest legal publishing network with now approaching 1 million published works, coming from about 63,000 publishers on about 3,000 publications. And it's a real pleasure to have the godfather of marketing on the internet for legal in Greg Siskind. And I first met Greg back in 1997, but by that time I think I was already in awe of the guy from having started my own law firm in somewhere 94, 95, and picking up this book called Internet Marketing Guide to Lawyers. So welcome, Greg.
It's nice to be here. I'm glad that one of us can remember how long it's been since we met, since it seems like it's been forever.
Yeah, you don't want to even say those things in front of a large crowd because they're looking around and going, God, I wasn't even born then.
Trust me, I've heard that now.
Yeah. I don't even know if you remember the first time we met. I remember it perfectly. So I don't know whether you do or not.
Was it at an ABA tech show? Was it at a law practice?
It was an ABA tech show in 1997. And the reason I could remember that, I think the receipt for your book was in that year that I lived 280 miles north of Chicago, to put this in context for Greg. And hearing this thing about the ABA Tech Show, I have no idea what it is, but I should go and find out. Now, understand, I had never seen a PowerPoint in my life at that point in time. But I'm standing at a registration desk, and I meet Jerry Lawson, but then I start to walk down the steps, and I saw you shook your hand. You put your arm around my shoulder and said, let me walk you around and introduce you to people. And
it was like me.
It was eye-opening. You knew all these people that were somehow stars in legal technology. How the heck did you get involved in what came to be known as, the internet, legal technology, and all that?
So it's not that glamorous a story, but it's and people can probably relate to it who've been in this situation. So I didn't even have a computer. Before I graduated law school, and this is like 1990, I had in law school, I had one of those typewriters that you could put a floppy disk in. That was my big technological advance, mostly because computers were like super expensive and I was super poor around that period of time. But I went into a large law firm, and it was it was one of these things where at the time, nobody had computers on their desks in law firms at that point, and it was you would have a dicta device. Usually it was just a tape recorder or whatever. You would bring the tapes down to the word processing folks, or you had a secretary. And I had a secretary, and I shared her with a partner who I just heard from recently. But the partner always got his work, and it was usually his work done before the associate. So I was struggling with deadlines that I could not get work done in a timely manner for a variety of reasons. I could get the work done, but the support team, it was causing me a lot of stress. So that was the mundane reason why I bought a computer, was just for word processing. And I thought that it's like, now it's time to jump into the computer age, several years after others did. When I got the computer, it had a modem. I wasn't quite sure about modems and what they were for, but they had these bulletin boards and all kinds of things that you could go out into the world and see things. And I think I had gotten a CompuServe account, maybe. I had found Usenet news groups. And then I started realizing that there was two things that were going on. That was going on with me, but I also was discovering I did not like corporate work, which is the department I was in. I really liked immigration, which I got a case by chance at the firm I was in, but they were not, it was sort of like they weren't getting very many of those cases. So I was trying to figure out how I could get immigration work. And then I figured out that there's this whole world of people that are on computers, tech people, university people that had internet access, not internet access, I should just say online access, back in, this is like 91, 92. So I started to get some matters because I was the only lawyer that was in that world at that time. Maybe there might have been one other. But basically answering questions for people on immigration law. And I didn't really know anything about immigration law, but I could look up something and I can give a correct
Yep.
answer. And so I was starting to get some matters that way. And then it occurred to me after my law firm told me that it was fine that I was doing immigration work as long as I billed my 2,000 hours of corporate work. Before that, I really did have that conversation with a partner at one point. He was like on there, but we hired you for corporate. We didn't hire you for immigration. We need to get, and I understand, but I figured out that this was going to be kind of my escape route, was the internet, which was starting to become more common. The other thing that was going on around 1993, I think it was, the Mosaic browser came out. And this was, the web had been around for several years already, but it was all text based. So it was like, it was a text document. You would see text on the screen, and there would be kind of a bolded text of something, and you click on it, it would take you to another text document. That was the World Wide Web until the Mosaic browser came and they started adding graphics, and people started having what looks like what a modern website would look like today. So I saw that and I got very interested in it. Also because, and I really am diving into the weeds, but it's, the history of the internet. A lot of people really don't realize that the early internet was completely non-commercial. There was no advertising. It was strictly just public. Well, I don't think public service is the right word, but a lawyer that was on there could basically answer questions, but they couldn't basically do what we consider advertising. The graphical web was the first of the internet tools. And we're talking about email, we're talking about file transfer protocol, which was just basically file uploading and downloading. And then these new Usenet news groups, which were the bulletin boards, all non-commercial. The web, though, was going to be different, and those rules were not going to apply to it. So I started to realize, well, this would be potentially a great thing for an immigration lawyer. Why? Especially an immigration lawyer in Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I was at the time. I'm in Memphis now, but I was in Nashville then. There was not a sort of ready supply of immigration clients in Nashville. But it's a federal practice area, number one. And number two, everything was filed by mail somewhere else. Even if you had an immigration office in your city, you would still be filing applications by mail. So it was the perfect practice area for an internet practice because it was federal. So I could look for clients anywhere in the country, and I didn't have to make personal appearances to do what I needed to do. So I could easily represent somebody in California or New Hampshire or wherever. So the bells went off, and I decided I was going to go and start a solo law firm, and build a website that was going to be how I was going to get clients. The other thing, because we're going to be talking about publishing today.
But that was Visa Law, right?
That was visalaw.com, and also I got that domain name in 1993. So happily, there were lots of good domain names that were still available in 1993. And I got that one.
Didn't you go, you went out on your own, but didn't you have a friend help you set up some of the stuff on the web or something? I'm trying to remember. Wasn't there a gentleman named, his first name was Tim, and he helped you?
Yeah, Tim Moses. Yeah. So I'll tell you about Tim in a second. But sort of the other thing that was kind of like timing and luck and timing, and there's a lot to be said for that. It's not always sort of like great planning or great, great thinking. So the other thing that was going on in my practice was I had been on loan, not on loan, but I was being borrowed for matters by the environmental law department at the firm where I was practicing at this point. And I had been asked to work with another lawyer on this project to make a 50-state survey of medical waste laws. Medical waste was a very hot topic in the early 1990s. There were all these needles washing up on beaches, and people were afraid of AIDS and all that stuff. So we write this 50-state guide for this hospital system client, and the fellow I did it with, wrote it with, very entrepreneurial guy. I'm not going to say his name because I don't know if he'd want me to, but he was so he was like an inspiration, this guy. So he's like maybe a year or two ahead of me at the firm, and he manages to get a publishing contract with West for a book on medical waste law, which was like amazed me that he could get
Right.
that together. But we wrote this book on medical waste law pretty quickly because it was a hot topic and they wanted to get it out. And then this book was like a phenomenal seller. And I made enough money on their book royalties for that book to basically give me a year's salary of like it was equivalent to almost a year's salary at the law firm at this point for what I was making, which is like unheard of for legal publishing on there to make that kind of money. He got it too. He invested in he started a medical waste company, and he did like, I'll tell you after the call, but basically the guy
You
did.
were you were married you were married at this time, so you had to be explaining to your wife that this is all going to work out. We're going to piece it together.
Yeah, so no, so it was anyway, so I had this check, um, and so I had some way to survive for a little while, on there. And see, the other, so basically this is 1994 now. I had already been working on this website. Tim Moses, I had, I remember I used the money to put down a down payment on an office condo. Not all of it, but I used a chunk of it. So, that was where I was going to be. And I had a little office condo. I'm a firm believer in owning real estate. I don't like to rent. Upstairs from me is this company called Telelink. One of the guys up there was somebody that I knew from Vanderbilt, which is where I went to school. But another guy, Tim Moses, was the CEO founder of this company, and it was the first web hosting company in at least in Nashville and probably in the region. And they had the problem, which is they were ahead of the game. They knew that this was going to be a big area, but nobody else did on there. So they didn't have any, they needed like normal businesses that would actually create websites and host it with them. And like, it wasn't just law firms, like nobody had websites
Right.
at this point in 93, 90 when I met these guys. So I told them I actually I've been working on this idea and I want to do a website. And I didn't know much about sort of how it was going to go from idea to being developed. I was doing my own like learning of HTML. That's the hypertext language to make websites. And it was pretty simple stuff back then. And I found some graphic designer to give me a banner logo or a banner graphic that was fine, but it was pretty simple stuff. But but I had these guys upstairs who were like, that was luck came in terms of like the book royalty and being downstairs from a web hosting company and being in the right practice area. I mean, a lot of things were going right at that point as far as
I probably heard about you through the internet somehow, because I was using AOL and Usenet groups and trying to figure out what was going on in the law and how lawyers could connect with people.
Yeah.
I was running in a running club with somebody, and he had owned a advertising and communications company that was doing high level work for like Betty Crocker and some for Microsoft.
Right.
And I said, have you ever done a website before? And he said, no, but that sounds intellectually stimulating. I went upstairs and I said, I got all these questions that I answer at AOL, and I need a place to start storing them, and I need to create articles out of them. And then they created that thing. But like you said, there was nothing out there really. And
Yeah.
most people ask me, what are you going to do with it? It was a fascinating time.
I had some people that were genuinely worried for me.
Yeah.
That they were like, you are just left this great job to be an immigration lawyer in Nashville, which was like, that itself was like, you're going to starve. There's not any work here. They didn't really understand sort of the internet at all as far as like what it is. But, also maybe 2% of the population had internet access at that point. But it was the good thing about what was going on was very quickly after I was working on, the website went up, then the media frenzy started with every media organization wanted to cover the web.
Right.
And so for like the next 2 years, anybody that had a website could get a news story, and not just like you can get the local paper to cover you, but I mean, it was like, You can get like the Wall Street Journal or Time Magazine, or the Washington Post to do stories on you just because you had a website. That was the news.
It was a big deal. I mean, USA Today said if I didn't stop at what I was doing, I would give lawyers a good name. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is amazing. And
Yeah,
then
so
the
that was super.
Minneapolis paper covered it. You're right. I forgot
Yeah.
about that aspect.
So timing really helped. So I got like a ton of free publicity, and then then the work started coming in. So that was how that started. And at the time, I had experience with this book with Wes, this medical waste handbook, and that was also what gave me the idea for, well, I already know how to, I already know how the process goes for writing a book, and that's when I started the second book, which was the internet marketing book that you mentioned, which that one and that first edition I did with Tim. I did another one with Rick Clow.
Right.
And Rick from ABA days before he went on to bigger things with Google, and then Deb McMurray was the third co-author when Rick got too busy, and we wrote the third and the fourth editions together, and then we basically decided the subject's too big for a book, so we both abandoned the project after.
But what you did for certain lawyers, and even though there were only 2% of the people on the internet, I remember thinking about that, and I'm thinking, well, I got 100% of them, because there isn't anybody else out here answering questions on personal
Right.
injury, med mal, employment law, and whatever, the things that I knew something about. Because people kept asking me, they go, well, how are you going to get any clients in La Crosse, Wisconsin? There's only 50,000 or 75,000 people here.
Right.
Who
This
uses
was
the internet?
a game changer for
And-
people in like these backwaters.
Yeah, and we had two numbers that you could call at AOL, and they would get busy at times, so you would try to call an out of town number to get back on the net. Heck,
So-
at that.
But that was sort of, I had, because I was downstairs from Tim in this 3-unit building or 6-unit building, and we were all, so it was on there, I was wired directly into their
There you
server
go.
on there. That was also like high speed was amazing. I didn't want to go home at night because I had dial up at home and I had high speed in the office.
Yeah, I mean, the local telephone company called us up, and they said, what are you doing? And I said, what do you mean, what are we doing? They said, well, you bought 8 telephone lines for 4 people. I said, yeah, we have to have access to the internet. And they
Yeah.
said, well, you can't use access to the internet all day long.
Why not?
And I'm saying, why not? We paid for it. And they never came back. But it was a fascinating time because it was so real and genuine. It was connecting with people in a real and genuine way. And what you did for lawyers may not have realized it, but you certainly did it for me. I can remember opening your book, at the end of a long table with my team, and I said, here it is. I've highlighted the things we got to get working on, and one of it is listservs. Who knows what those are? And an associate raises his hand. He says, I know. I said, so you got to get the domain names for, personal injury law forum, workers' compensation law forum, medical malpractice law forum.
Yeah.
And then we just invited lawyers to participate, which they did. The lawyers had emails in the leading organizations for trial law, and then let consumers know on AOL and Answers that they could come and answer beyond or ask questions behind the message boards. And to show how crazy it was at that point in time, LexisNexis was paying, I found out, $5 million a year to put a button on the front of the legal section. And I was listed as the legal section coordinator or moderator for the whole thing for free. I didn't know what I was really getting, but it really was the heyday. Tell the story about, though, how it blew up at one point in time with the immigration lawyers, though, and the Usenet groups, where things started to really like, wow, are people allowed to do this and use the internet for this without getting ethically in trouble? Wasn't there a group that went out and spammed the net using Usenet?
Oh,
groups?
yeah. I was actually an expert in that case on there for the, because one of the lawyers happened to be licensed in Tennessee, even though the two were in Phoenix, this law firm that was doing it. Anyway, this was the transition during that transition period from the non-commercial to the commercial web. But maybe it was like 93 before the web. There was this thing called the Green Card Lottery, and it's still around, but basically it's sort of this program where at the time you could mail in a little piece of paper with some information on it, and you would be considered in this lottery for a green card. And it was designed to diversify the immigrant pool away from the big countries that were coming in. It was originally a third of them were reserved for Irish nationals. I think Ted Kennedy and Daniel Patrick Moynihan were the original sponsors of that bill. So there you go. But anyway, these two lawyers decide to spam all of the Usenet news groups, the thousands of groups with posts about their green card lottery services, and it created this big hoopla about that this was a violation of Netiquette, which was not really a thing, but it was a thing on there, and it was a anyway. So they got into a lot. They got a lot of publicity for it, which probably helped them. But but they also got a lot of people mad at them, and somebody filed a bar complaint in Tennessee, where I was, because of because, like I said, one of them was licensed there. So at this point, I already have, kind of one of the interesting things at the time when I decided to do a website, I was very nervous about the ethics issues on there. And I was nervous about Tennessee had this weird rule that said for any advertising that you did, it wasn't just the content that mattered. You had to actually print out a copy of the ad and send it
Yeah.
to the state board, and they would file it away, and that was the end of it. And I contacted my board, and it's like, I got this new website, and I and it's really content rich, and I'm publishing stuff every day on this website. Do you really want me to print out this whole thing and mail it to you every day? And they said, no, that's not necessary. But they said, you can just send us an email. Or what I ended up doing was I put a log on the website, and every time I would make a change, I would post it in this log on the site of what changed on the site that day on there, that was more common then than you see now, but it was actually a fairly common thing at the time. But anyway, I also, at this point was, I don't think when I had finished the book yet with the ABA, but maybe it was in process. But the board, for some reason, decided I was like the one guy in Tennessee who knew about the subject, and they had a complaint about it, and that I actually had a relationship with the board because I inquired about ethics
Right.
about it. So they made me the expert to come up to Nashville. But the lawyer that was accused was a no-show and didn't try and defend himself, and he ended up getting, I don't know, a suspension or whatever. But that so the most important thing, if you are actually accused of something, is to actually like show up and defend yourself, because if you don't, you're sort of like it's kind of yeah. Uh, right. I think Florida also was like threatening. Florida was threatening to go after anybody anywhere in the country if it could be seen by a Florida consumer.
And,
You'd have to that you could be disciplined on there. And eventually, I can't remember how that got worked around, but there would be like disclaimers people would be putting saying, "Oh, and we will not take clients in Florida," or whatever the
I
states were that
or
were doing it.
I had a disclaimer that said this will not be considered advertising in states that would consider it advertising, because it was a free speech right issue too, as to whether
Yeah.
the bar rules could even be applicable to it. But it was fascinating to call your bar. And I can remember calling them and I'm saying, you probably have, and they were thinking, what are you even talking about? And I had the same issue. Are you going to have me, we're answering 4 to 7 questions a day and putting it up on the web plus articles. Are we going to print these all off and send them to you? It was a little bit crazy. I made the decision to do 2 things. One was to call my insurance company and said, do we have an advertising rider that would cover
Mhm.
publishing on the internet? So they contacted the company and said, yes, you do. And I go, okay, we're going to be okay. I don't remember what year the Communications and Decency Act came out, but that came out with Clinton, I think. So that those things that were published maybe by other people on sites that I
Then there
had.
was the Canned Spam Act
Yeah.
also around that time.
So then we had that protecting us. And then I just decided that I was going to be in the wrong profession if I couldn't help people in a way that they could really be helped. So just marched ahead and waited till somebody would say stop. And nobody said stop. You just continue to try to help people.
I have to be honest. Also, the one thing that I understood the politics of the regulation of lawyers, and if large firms were adopting it, I was safe. that was sort of in my mind. I was thinking that it's like all these big firms are putting websites out there, and I'll just kind of look and see what their disclaimers look like, and I'll kind of see what they're doing. And
Right.
if they're okay, then I'm okay, because they're not going to discipline. These firms were not going to take that step if it was going to lead to ethics disasters for them. And they felt, and if they felt comfortable enough with them, and they're pretty conservative when it comes to advertising, at least more conservative now then than they were now,
Right.
then I was going to be safe. And that was the other thing that was sort of the signal for the rest of the bar, was when all the large law firms started putting websites up, that this was not going to be something that was going to be snuffed out.
And then you started, I mean, let's talk about publishing, almost like from where it was then to where it is today.
Sure.
I mean, you started to publish a voluminous amount of information onto the internet at Visa Law. If I remember correctly, it was comparable to what the federal government was putting out, if not more timely.
The federal government didn't have a website
Yeah, okay.
until like 1999. I mean, it was
Right.
the Immigration Service. It was really crazy how they were like one of the last agencies with it was, and when they started, it was just literally a biography of the commissioner of the Immigration Naturalization Service on there, and that was the whole website.
Right.
It was Doris Meisner's biography. But I had a yeah, so I was my big concern as an immigration lawyer was, well, I mean, there were a couple things. One, I was super young. I was 22 when I started practicing law. And so at this point, I'm like still maybe 25 when I was working on this website. So I'm a pretty young guy, don't have a lot of credibility. And I don't have experience. And I'm in a place where you don't normally associate immigration lawyers with being. So I knew that I was going to have to really focus on trying to convince people that I was probably worth taking a chance on as an immigration lawyer. And the way that I figured to do that would just be to publish a ton of stuff, and people would perceive me as an expert because I had written so much. That was the problem I was trying to solve, and writing did that. Now, one of the things I did at the time I started the website was also started email newsletter, and so I started this email newsletter about the same time I started the website, and I actually started it on AOL initially because nobody had email addresses. So people had AOL accounts, and so I started distributing it there. Built that email list built up really quickly as people were getting email addresses and having real access to the internet. So that was that email newsletter. It's still published, by the way. It's Siskind's Immigration Bulletin. It's called. I guess 31 years on there. It's probably. I think it's. I claim, without anybody ever contradicting me, that it's the oldest email newsletter in existence, and I think it was the oldest. Even, I mean, I don't think there were any before that. But law firms that were distributing their newsletters electronically was not a thing in mid 1994. But I had that, and that caught on really quickly, and a lot of people were subscribing to that, and and then I would put, and then I had that, and then I wanted to do longer form stuff, so really what I was interested in, again, from, this riches and niches
Yeah.
concept, I knew I wasn't, I could pursue the high tech stuff, but it wasn't local. In other places, there were like banking law. I mean, there was financial industry stuff. There were other areas we didn't have and so I was trying to think, what local practice could I focus on? And there was one that was really attractive, which was the healthcare industry, which in Nashville, most of the people listening to this wouldn't have any idea that this is the case, but Nashville is really the Silicon Valley for hospital companies. It was at one point, I don't know what the statistics are now, that 1/4 of all the private hospital beds in the country were run by Nashville companies. Companies like HCA and Community Health Systems and Light Points and all these companies. And there wasn't really any immigration practice out there that had a huge share of that market, and there were a bunch of little folks that had that, and nobody in Nashville, where all these companies happen to be headquartered. So I said, well, that's what I want to go at, and it's super complicated, more complicated than regular immigration, and it's can with clients that can pay their bills, and it's relatively recession proof. It checked a lot of boxes that I wanted to do physician immigration. Plus, I was interested in medicine. I thought at one point in my life I wanted to be a doctor, so I always had sort of an interest in what they do. So I decided I was going to write a book on that subject, which hadn't come out yet. And I got, at that point, I'm already like an expert. I already have like 2 books out here. So I know how to like get a book contract on there. And I got Lexis, which was, well, Matthew Bender, which was
Right.
the publisher at the time, which became part of Lexis. They gave me a contract for that book. And that book was my entree to a lot of those hospital systems where all of a sudden now I had the major book on the subject, and that gave me a lot of credibility. And sort of that's a theme over and over again, which is that if you want to build up your brand as being an expert on something, there's nothing better than being published in that space. And it can take a lot of different forms. I happen to like the book publishing because I like those big projects. But for a lot of people, I think just, writing regularly on a particular subject is a way for them to eventually, I don't like to say fake it until you make it in terms of the expertise, but if you write enough about a particular subject, at some point, the clients will be, the clients,
Well, they'll follow the person that's studying the content too. The way
right.
I looked at it, when I started a company that was doing blogs for lawyers, I really didn't know what a blog was. I had read some things on it and thought it was fascinating. It was the right fit. So I started to just share what I was reading on blogging. And after a while, I realized I know a fair amount about this, and people think I know a lot about it, and they started coming to us. Didn't you also focus at one point in time on professional sports teams and minor league sports leagues, athletes,
Yeah,
via publishing online?
we have yeah, that's been we've had a lot of sports and entertainment work over the years. So being in Nashville, what else is in Nashville aside from hospital systems? Music on there. So, and there's a lot of illegal musicians especially from Canada that are in Nashville on there. So that was sort of one area where I could find clients was music industry clients. And so I kind of got into that. I did some writing about I-9s, which I don't want to go into here because I don't want to bore everybody to death. But when somebody who was the person who was in charge of immigration at Cirque du Soleil saw this on the internet, this article I wrote, and she contacted me, and I ended up going out to Las Vegas and helping them with a project that had to do with I-9s. And they were my entree to the sports work because we started doing work for them, and they both, they combined the arts and sports at that particular company. And then eventually we started doing, I think we were like minor league hockey, and
Right.
we did work for a minor league hockey league, and then ended up getting other kinds of work. So it's been pretty steady over the years. We've done professional wrestlers and Olympic soccer players and others over the years. So that's kind of a fun practice area. But as far as the volume of it goes, there are plenty of lawyers that do more of that kind of work than we
Right.
do. But I enjoy it. It's fun. And yeah, I always have liked I tell people sort of a common theme for most of the immigration work that we do at our firm is we deal with talent, whether it is talent in the sciences. We do a lot of work with universities. We do a lot of work with medical researchers. We do entertainment, sports, a lot of entrepreneurs, startup company founders. But the common theme is that they all are talented in one respect or another. And that's why and that's for me,
That's
probably the
a
most interesting part of
that's
immigration.
it's a great way to describe it. I've never used that word talent, but when I think about the people that have published on the network or that we put up on the platforms, they were very talented, energetic, passionate, and visionary people. They could see the niche because they could see that if you do retail patent litigation, you're going to pick up the major retail companies because nobody else was publishing on it. Or
Right.
if there's nobody publishing on FMLA, well, publish on it, and you will become known as the FMLA
I was
person.
just yeah, so somebody had just asked me to write a little piece about whether lawyers are whether whether AI was going to take all the lawyer jobs on there. And I said, well, one way that you can sort of like insulate yourself a bit is to have a weird niche um that nobody's going to develop an AI product to automate that particular weird little practice area because there's not enough of a market in it.
Right.
So just like find those areas of law, those weird areas, and you become the gal or the guy on that particular area, and then you can make some AI to automate it, but And, if you're trying to sort of have some preservation, that was so I was always looking for sort of those weird practice areas that I wasn't competing with everybody else.
Yeah, and there was a firm that we work with in California that would say, "We don't have any competition." And I remember and some of the people in the audience was at a retreat for with the young lawyers, and I go, "What do you mean we have no competition?" And the oldest lawyer that was there was speaking, he goes, "We look for niches in petri dishes. There ain't anything else going on in this niche. And we don't need to have X thousand people if we own 90% of the market. We already got, all that size of the market." But the amazing thing that I don't think people appreciated is it happens through publishing, online or offline. If you get out there and begin to publish, it may not happen the first month, but you start to get seen and you start to get noticed.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I've always, and a few years after that, we actually started a publishing house at our firm. And that was, and during that period of time, I was also the chair of the law practice division's book publishing program, still called law practice management section when I was doing that. But I kind of learned a little bit from the publisher side of things, how the business worked. So I was an author and then I was a publisher through them. And so that sort of made it a lot easier for me to look at doing it. I don't know, and then, but this was during the Amazon revolution when all of a sudden, uh, you know, the idea of doing publishing on your own,
Self-publishing.
you could, yeah. Well, I tell people it's like you're not self-publishing. You have created your own publishing house
Right.
and you own the publisher. Self-publishing always sort of had this connotation of some kind of like amateurish
Right.
DIY on there. And now you can't if there are a number of really good authors in a lot of different fields, not just law, that have done that, where they've basically created the whole operation, and they're publishing because Amazon's the biggest distributor, and Amazon doesn't really distinguish between, the big publishing houses versus everybody else. The print quality, you have complete control over it with the now, as far as like everything from how heavy the weight is going to be to, the quality of the book cover to the binding and all that parts. So the books look fabulous that are coming out now, and you have a lot more control over the content than you do when you're with publisher. But more importantly as well, that for a lot of people that write books, especially in law, the whole goal is not necessarily nobody's in it for the royalty. And the authors that are writing law books, they are trying to build up their practice areas and maybe
Build a
impress their
name.
clients.
Same
Uh,
thing. Same thing as Google on the net. If I were to ask you two other questions, I mean, doesn't it feel a little bit like we're going back to the future where publishing was really important? Then we went through the Google age where everybody chased analytics and SEO and all this. And now with AI is basically saying, "Hey, we're looking for the authority, buddy. Uh,
yeah.
are you publishing online? Are people citing you online? Are you
Yeah.
publishing
Yeah.
books?
Yeah. No, I just,
Are you in libraries?"
I just wrote an article about this. So I don't know, for 15, 20 years, I don't know how long it's been. I've been writing marketing column for the Law Practice magazine that's the ABA puts out. And I'm always sort of like thinking about what's going on in my law firm and I'll write about that because, I'm thinking about that subject. And so the subject was just coming up what you're talking about, where one of my partners was just completely shocked, even though we're like, you shouldn't be shocked. I mean, we spun off an AI company, but
Right.
he was shocked that some physician had put in like who are the best physician immigration law firms for physicians needing immigration help. And ChatGPT listed our firm, and then he like did all this vetting where he was basically having this whole conversation with ChatGPT asking about our firm and why it picked it, and sort of like whether it was and everything was done in ChatGPT, and she was really thought that was amazing. And I was thought it was interesting too. So I started doing the research for this. I said, I'm going to write an article on this for my next column, since this is something we're talking about, because we were talking about like, how can we be more visible to the AI so that that can happen? And as I was doing the research, it was exactly what you were saying, which is that it's it's taking a step backwards in terms of trying to sort of like crunch numbers and looking at, analytics and all that. And it's just looking at what makes, why somebody, why would somebody have, and what makes somebody have a good reputation? It would be that they're a thought leader on a particular subject based on what they were writing. It might be based on these ranking sites that are out there, like Chambers or Martindale or those. It might be based on what others are writing about there. But it was interesting because they weren't talking about, and when you're talking about SEO and people are spending a ton of money, they're talking about lots of metadata and things like that to get maybe a inferior content viewed as more important than somebody who actually is writing great content and really has a, normally is going to be the right person for you to go to based on what their demonstration of their expertise. And that seems to be, the AI seems to be a lot better at figuring out who the experts are, I think, than CO. So I'm kind of like hopeful that lawyers that have just paid their dues in terms of really building up their expertise are going to get their due now, and the AI will reward. I'm sure people are going to figure out ways to game the AI too, but for right now, it seems to do a pretty good job. I think when I ask those kinds of questions, of finding you a good list of people to consider.
Yeah, it's been interesting because even just researching subjects, what I'm finding out is the lawyers who publish are coming up as sources. So the answer might be there for you, but the source of the answer was a particular publication that the lawyer put out, whether it was in print or digital. I want to ask you one other question. I mean, you always claimed that you had the first law blog because you were publishing in reverse chronological order, which I think always brought up questions in maybe it was my mind or Bob Ambrosie's mind or other people's.
I
But
claim it.
you,
I'm
but
like,
but
prove
but
me
you're
wrong.
you're pretty clear about it.
Well, you can see it. It exists on archive.org. It's not something that's sort of like, I mean, it's like you can go onto the Wayback Machine
Mm,
and go back to 1997 or 98 when
right.
that thing was happening. I was calling it, I wasn't calling it a log. I was just calling it an online journal or something like that at the point. But what was going on at that time, the reason why I created the thing was there was a effort in Congress to increase H-1B numbers. And there was going to be this big, there was this big push that was going on, and I had a lot of people that were trying to keep up with this legislation. So what I would, what I did for this project was I essentially created just a simple text document, and then I would just take it down, add an entry that said
I
the
was just
date and
out.
timestamp, FTP it back up, and I was doing that several times a day. In fact, I think one day I had like 50,000 downloads of that page, which was just like, I mean, enormous. There was so much interest in it. And then within a few months, this weblog thing was becoming big. And I was like, I don't think I was the first person ever to do this thing with the chronology and
Right.
keeping track of it, the entries and all that. But it was not really any different than the stuff that was coming later. So I felt like, just because the word blog was coined a couple months later. I mean, it was within a couple of months. The term hadn't been coined yet, I don't think, when this was going up, but it was within a couple of months that the web
Yeah.
when what's happening is like
What's the difference?
what's the difference? Uh,
And it really even isn't today. I'm talking about whether you need the term blog or you don't need the term blog. It's publishing, and you're sharing information in reverse chronological order based on what you're publishing. Greg, what would you tell the lawyers that are stressed a little bit today in large firms looking to get out and maybe develop a name? Young lawyers or law grads coming out of school and the ability to develop a niche. Can it still be done with publishing?
yeah, no, for sure on there. In fact, I am still working. I mean, I still work with lawyers, young lawyers, in terms of putting out books and putting out content. So yes, the on there, especially if you can find something that is, and it's so much easier now to get published because everybody can self-publish. It's not hard to create a blog. It's not hard to write articles. Books are harder, but they're definitely doable. And I think that people are sort of good with project management can do it. But I tell people it's like writing a 15 or 20 chapter book. With each chapter, you're basically talking about 15 or 20 articles of 10 to 15 pages each. You can do that in a year if you think about it. I mean, it's like you'd say, or 2 years or whatever, but it's not. If you break it down that way and just tell people that's what it is on here, you need a good, a good table of contents at the front end so that you can kind of follow along. And basically, each chapter is a long, is an article on there, and you can throw some illustrations in to make it a little bit, easier. But that's I think a lot easier to do today because of the changes in the publishing industry, but also publishing is there's video, there's video content that you can do. That's a form of publishing where it may be that you're more comfortable, in a blog of just posting a video and discussing something. But I do think that it's, a lot easier for lawyers now. They don't have to have a middleman. They don't have to find a law journal. They don't have to find a book publisher. They don't have to find somebody that can basically be, that's the gatekeeper to keep people that can introduce you to an audience. You can go out and find those audiences yourself.
Yeah, it is.
Now when I do a book, like I did a book sort of after we created our publishing house. I said, I'm never going to write a book with a publisher again because it was so freeing to do it on our own. And then I did a book with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, this big systems manual book. They call it the cookbook for immigration lawyers, big 4,000-page book. And I did it with them because I thought it would be a good partnership to reaching the immigration bar on there. And it would be, they also, and I speak at conferences, and then we have all kinds of other things that are going on with that book. But there was a very specific reason why I chose them, and it wasn't because that was the only way that I could actually publish, was to find somebody to publish. I knew I could do it myself, but there were some good reasons why I wanted to do it with them. Same thing now, I'm doing a book for the ABA.
You publish books like some people publish articles. It almost sounds at times.
Well, I like to have a project.
Yeah. You have plenty of them with 2 or 3 different companies going.
It's just project management, but you said it's like writing articles, but it's like basically writing a series of articles on a theme, and that, and you can turn it into that. I do think that book publishing for a lot of people, well, you're a marathon runner over many years, and it's sort of like, it's a big feeling of accomplishment when you get to the finish line on there. And there's nothing like seeing a book for the, that you wrote the first time you see it with the new cover and the, if it's the first edition for the cover and all that. And it's a tremendous feeling of accomplishment. So I tell people, it's like, and now you can take a book and turn it into an enormous amount of smaller content projects that you can turn, one book probably into a couple hundred blog posts, for example.
And vice versa. I'm working with ChatGPT to work with my blog to turn it back into chapters and outline it for me.
My next column for the ABA is about recycling content and how to make one, when you do a speech, how you turn that into and how to turn your PowerPoints into articles and how to turn your speeches into blog posts and all that kind of thing. So that's it's like, it's all content, and now it's just figuring out how to get the most mileage out of it.
Yeah, I could sit here and do another one of these with you because I learn as much as I'm asking you. But I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed it. You can get the podcast anywhere that you want, that you normally do for podcasts, whether it's audio or video. It'll be up on my blog as well. I want to thank Greg very, very much. And I certainly see him a few times a year, and I enjoy our company because I learn a heck of a lot from him. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin.